Dear viewers, a warm welcome to today's visit. Thank you for your entries at Visite at QS24.TV. It's a very nice dialogue with each other. This program is filled with so much life and I'm allowed to take the feedback. I'm very happy that the circle of interest is growing and growing and growing. And that you share all this information with your family and friends. Thank you very much for that. Today I have a letter from Rainer. Rainer, you write to me because you are referring to an interview with Dr. Klinghardt about parasites. And you have been excreting somewhat strange creatures over the intestine for some time. And according to your research, they could be ropeworms. And you were so friendly and sent me these pictures. And I can confirm that. And that's what a ropeworm looks like. It's actually always a conglomerate of them. There is also a lot of ignorance about these things. Some people deny it. They are intestinal structures. Others say, yes, they are helminths, ropeworms. And I can already refer on the great experience of Dr. Klinghardt. Because he did studies. And they did clinical tests of these ropeworms. And of course, this biofilm structure. It's like a long structure that looks like a worm. And they saw that there are a lot of small latent organisms that describe this organ structure in themselves or in the organ. And then they form a gas. So they are blubbering. They release this gas and that way they have this movement in the intestine. They can also suck on the intestinal wall. It is a conglomerate that affects both the thin intestine and the large intestine. And thus, of course, also in the context of their night activity. They can also prepare a sleepless night for one or the other. Or also because of their high toxicity to substances they release, also impact the psyche, the way people react. And because the ropeworm has its suction cups, it really has a little head and it has its tail at the back. And so it can permanently attach itself to the intestinal mucosa. And then, of course, also cause a certain anemia in the context of its existence. Anemia always means a little blood loss. And you can tell that the hemoglobin value or that the iron, the ferritin, the storage iron, changes through these processes. This is very important. And you always have to know that such structures, in the context of a parasitic strain, and I'm not just talking about the ropeworms, but about parasites in general, that these, in turn, when they present themselves as a biofilm structure, of course also house many, many other parasites, but also viruses, bacteria, fungi. And that within the context of one of your questions, how can you get rid of ropeworms at all, that this biofilm structure is very, very intensely attached to the intestinal mucosa. Today we are observing the whole question of parasitic strains. I would say about 6-7 years with a very strong intensity. And my experience from the current perspective is that all the processes that also affect the intestine, the question of a reactivated EBV load, where you say, Epstein-Barr, I'm always very tired, I'm exhausted. A chronic mycosis, a fungus disease, a rheumatic disease, all the things where bacteria play a role, chlamydia play a role, Borrelia play a role, you have to go back much more concentrated. So healing always needs a great truth, and a parasite treatment is and should always be at the forefront. It simply has to do with the fact that we are living in a time when the host human being is a very well-received host for parasite growth, because the human organism is today burdened by so much toxicity and thus has a weaker immunity in many ways. The other thing is that electrosmog, radioactivity, has a great influence on our autonomy to call these processes into the same activity. These are the high toxic loads, these are the high psychostress loads that we humans have. And of course we offer parasitic loads, and I'm not just talking about the ropeworm, but also about maggots, spores, and many others that we use for international contacts, by flying around the world, by using airports, but by maybe only having our pets. These are things that we should all take very, very seriously. It's not like we can only make a diagnosis based on a stool analysis. A negative stool examination does not mean having no ropeworms, no spores, but here the electroacupuncture has proven to be very, very effective. Or we work with the ropeworm device, it's a bioresonance device. And again life gives us the right to become therapeutically effective by observing the consequences or the elimination of these processes. And of course that leaves the room for the next therapeutic step. That means I have to treat the parasites first, I have to detect the fungus load, I have to detect the bacterial load, I have to detect the viral processes, I have to detect the toxic processes, and then ultimately, like a withdrawal of loads, to really help an organism. I think that's what we doctors have also started doing, and not that we leave a disease diagnosed in stone and say, that can only be cured by medication. Today, a clientele of open-minded, thoughtful, and cause-conscious people is undergoing a great development, and that needs medicine's attention. And of course it's important to accept that these things can be identified through these procedures. I'll come back to the ropeworm. If we understand it more as a conglomerate in a biofilm, then it's typical for the ropeworm. When it's separated, there are also huge mucous membranes that make this biofilm very clear. I consider it a matter of importance that you have to remove a biofilm once or twice a year due to the high load that we are currently observing in humans. And this biofilm naturally lays on the intestinal mucous membrane. The intestine is now a surface, if you fold it out, of 400 square meters. That's an incredible amount of surface with the scripts, where this biofilm naturally creates its own reservoir. This of course always creates this discomfort for us humans, because we don't have adequate regulation of the stool, sometimes too soft, sometimes too firm. Then the absorption of micronutrients is also significantly limited. And what do you do when you take in such a load of high-quality food? You first provide the parasites with it. That means, removing this biofilm means, in general, to ensure a healthy structure of the intestinal flora afterwards. Sometimes it doesn't make much sense to take in probiotics and prebiotics for years if this biofilm is still there permanently, which you sometimes don't see in a colonoscopy or in an intestinal mirroring. That's why I feel like saying we're using the intestinal detox program from Vitamunda. I've tried many other things, and we've had a pretty good success with that. I remember a young woman who then took this okra powder. We always say 4 to 6 days. It's necessary to only drink. This okra powder is very, very, very mucus, which means it will solidify in a short time. You have to drink these things up to 1.2 liters a day, only within the framework of the main meals, in a liquid form. And it sticks very strongly to this biofilm. This young woman had food intolerance, and there were hardly any things that she could tolerate still. She had histamine intolerance, lactose intolerance, fructose intolerance, and then of course on the other side a strong parasite burden. The first step was the biofilm. What I found very nice was that she couldn't tolerate these snacks, which contained cerebellum powder and spirulina, and she left them, drank a lot of water, drank tea, and then only took the main meals, these 1.2 liters with this okra powder, and she didn't do that for 6 days, but for 12 days. And after the 12th day, she excreted an incredible amount, and then gave the intestine a reconvalescence that allowed her to eat everything today. And that was really great for me. I was deeply moved by her courage, that she had actually decided to do it all for herself. But I only realized how important it is that we really get to the beginning of these things. And I would also highly recommend in this case, to recommend to everyone to do it once a year, and to the dog or cat keeper or lives in nature whatever is connected to nature, that you do it regularly. On the other hand, it is very important to be well prepared for a parasitic situation, that you have a garlic enema once a month, or after full moon. There is such a stench inside that parasites only want one thing, they are looking for the exit. And with that you can really interrupt a development very briefly. Or that you also, if you know that antiparasitic, for example thyme tea has a very high antiparasitic effect, antibacterial effect, to chew papaya seeds in between, to chew grapefruit seeds, to drink rhubarb root tea twice a day, the whole rosol, that is enriched with resinous oil, with bitter substances, walnut oil. There are also a lot of antiparasitic drops. Do it, just do it, if you have ever achieved an intestinal detox or a withdrawal of the biofilm, to keep the intestine in focus again and again. I am the intestinal therapist since 1991, and that is the root of the plant in humans. And nothing, but nothing at all, is so important to really worry about, because from the misplacement and from the malfunction, everything else for the body tomorrow cannot be kept in balance. And that is why it is so important to integrate these things into everyday life, to then also regularly take care of it, to have a good balance of the intestine. For my understanding, this is 60% of our health and well-being. And if you just think about the fact that dopamine is produced there, serotonin, our happiness hormone, is produced there, B vitamins are produced there, the big one, 2/3 of our immunity is the intestinal mucosa, then we should not be surprised if we become infectious, or if someone says, yes, whenever the daughter brings an infection, I also have an infection. That is not so intended by life, that is also not so intended by nature. The question is, what is wrong with the mucous membranes? Who is dancing around there? Who has made his second home? And you really have to pay close attention to that. Intestinal detox at the Ropeworm, gladly. There is also the so-called Goober-off protocol. And this Goober-off protocol was coined by Walensky and his colleagues at the time to remove the mites. And that's really a so-called sequence of a so-called cleaning water, different cleaning procedures, which then begin with sodium hydrogen carbonate, i.e. baking soda, but then alternately with eucalyptus oil, again and again with lemon juice, then from milk and salt. You can get all the information in detail, I think. There is very, very good experience in the elimination of the ropeworm. And it is much, much more often than we think. And I can't sign that these are just intestinal structures. Of course, it is fissured on the intestinal mucous membrane. And when it is excreted, it already has a macroscopic, analog look. Or a construct of an intestinal mucous membrane. But today we know, thanks to Dr. Klinghart's research, that the DNA structures are of the most diverse bacteria, of the most diverse parasites, which are structured in this organ band together. And the problem behind it is actually that you notice that the intestine is not well regulated, that it is burdened, that you may suddenly have complaints at night. And you can actually worry about this thing quite well. And then, I think, with the means you have available, then remove it and should do it. Always remember that parasites don't like to get food. So if you fast, this is a very high antiparasitic measure. Intakes in any case, and not just with the things I said, but also the coffee coal from the company Belida. But you can also actually make coffee intakes. Then take 3 tablespoons of organic coffee for a liter of water, let it boil properly for 5 minutes, and then simmer for 20 minutes. Let it stand nicely, it cools down, and then it is simply sieved. And you can use this wonderfully as a high intake in the corresponding cooled body or temperature for this intake. You can add a pinch of salt. You can also add a bag of Symbiolact, these are the bifidobacteria lactobacillus. And if you want to do good to the intestine again and again, not to tolerate it being blocked for 2 or 3 days, this is a very big and valuable measure, which you can integrate exactly at that moment, if you also have headaches again and again, have migraines. These are miracles that take place when you open the closet immediately and support the body here in the context of its detoxification. Yes, Raina, I hope that I was able to help you with the Parasite Congress. If you enter Dr. Klinghard Ropeworm, I think you will get to this highly interesting interview that he gave himself. And this Goober-off protocol can be downloaded there or on another platform. But I think you are well advised to really take these things very consistently and to restore peace and a certain normality in the interior. Yes, and I can say goodbye. I thank you very much. I look forward to your further entries at Visite at QS24.tv. And would like to give you a little thought on the way. I like the writer Hans Gruber so much, and he wrote a poem called Encouragement Stand Up to You. As often as you have fallen, realize yourself, as long as you have denied yourself. Stay with you, as often as you have felt betrayed. Go with you, even if you lead yourself into crisis or madness 1,000 times. Take Nick with you, even if the whole world shakes its head over you. And believe in yourself, then you have a faith that will help you. In this sense, I wish you a wonderful, beautiful week, and I look forward to the next visit with you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.